Stop for a moment before you go any further. If you have tried this before, if you have declared with real conviction that this was the month you would wake early, cut the noise, train your body, guard your mind, and finally become the version of yourself you keep almost becoming, and if you quietly gave up somewhere around day 9 or day 14, this is not a coincidence that brought you here tonight. Most people who attempt this kind of disciplined reset do not fail because they are weak. They fail because no one ever told them the truth about how transformation actually works. They were sold intensity when what they needed was structure. They were sold willpower when what they needed was design. And so they burned bright for a week, collapsed, and quietly decided that they were simply not the kind of person capable of change. That conclusion was wrong. Tonight, we correct it. Here is the uncomfortable truth. 90% of people who attempt a serious period of self-discipline do not fail in week 3. They fail in the first 72 hours, and then they spend the following weeks pretending otherwise, restarting in secret, ashamed to admit that the version of themselves they announced to the world already quietly slipped away. They tell friends they are still on day 12, when privately they are back on day 1 for the 4th time. They delete the tracking app rather than watch the number reset again. This is not laziness, and it is not a lack of ambition. It is what happens when a person builds an entire transformation on top of a single emotional peak, then acts surprised when that peak, like all peaks, eventually comes back down. If this describes a season of your life, you are not being told this to shame you. You are being told this because until you understand why the collapse happens, you will keep repeating it, no matter how many times you begin again, no matter how sincere the next declaration feels in the moment you make it. There is an old principle quieter than most self-improvement advice that explains this pattern completely. Transformation is never won in the large decision. It is won or lost in the next 5 minutes. Most people who attempt a strict period of discipline make one enormous decision, often at midnight, often after watching something that made them feel small, often in a rush of shame or ambition. They decide all at once to become disciplined. They set impossible rules. No phone, no sugar, no sleeping in, 2 hours of study, an hour of training, cold showers, silence, all of it starting tomorrow, all at once, forever. This is not discipline. This is a dare made to oneself in a moment of emotional intensity, and emotional intensity by its nature fades. The old principle says that the large vow is not what carries a person through 40 days of change. What carries a person through is a much smaller and much less glamorous thing. The ability to make one slightly better choice in the next 5 minutes, and then to do that again and again without needing to feel inspired each time. People do not fail monk mode because they lack ambition. They fail because they built a version of discipline that depends entirely on feeling motivated, and feelings, left alone, are the least reliable engine a person can build a life on. The ones who succeed are not the ones who feel the most fire on day 1. They are the ones who built a structure sturdy enough to keep functioning on the days the fire is gone. Think of the difference this way. A vow is a single event. It happens once, usually in a moment of heightened emotion, and after that moment passes, the vow has nothing left to stand on except memory. A structure is different. A structure does not need you to remember why you started. It only needs you to show up to the same small point at the same rough time, enough times that showing up stops requiring a decision at all. This is the entire secret hidden inside every quiet story of sustained change, and it is also the reason so many loud, ambitious attempts collapse by the end of the first week. The person did not lack sincerity. They simply built their entire effort on the wrong material, a feeling instead of a rhythm. Consider Daniel. Daniel works nights as a security guard at a distribution warehouse on the edge of town, the kind of place with humming fluorescent lights and a gate that never fully stops creaking. He is 34. He has a daughter 7 years old, who is usually asleep by the time he leaves for his shift and usually already at school by the time he gets home. For most of that year, Daniel's evenings had a particular shape. He would eat something quick, standing at the counter, then spend the hours before his shift scrolling through his phone, half watching videos of other people's disciplined mornings, other people's clean kitchens, other people's calm, ordered lives, feeling a familiar mixture of inspiration and quiet defeat. He owed $420 on a car repair he had put on a card back in the spring, and every time the reminder email arrived, he felt a small, specific shame that he never mentioned to anyone. One night, sitting in the guard booth near 2 in the morning, Daniel decided he was done watching other people's discipline from the outside. He announced to himself, the way so many people do, that starting the next day he would overhaul everything. Wake at 5, no phone until noon, no fast food, an hour of reading, push-ups before the shift. He wrote the list on the back of a delivery slip and felt, for about 6 hours, unstoppable. By day 3, exhausted from cutting his sleep too aggressively and irritated at himself for failing the no phone rule twice already, he quietly stopped. He did not tell anyone he had stopped. He simply stopped and went back to the counter dinners and the scrolling, telling himself he would try again once things settled down, the way he always told himself that. What made it worse was the shame that followed, small but persistent, the kind that does not announce itself loudly but sits quietly behind ordinary moments. Driving past the mechanic's shop, opening the banking app, catching his own reflection in the dark warehouse windows during a slow hour. He had done this before, more than once. A gym membership used twice, a budgeting spreadsheet abandoned after 1 week. Each failed attempt had left behind a small accumulating belief that he was simply not built for this kind of consistency, that other people had some quality he was missing. What changed for Daniel was not a bigger burst of willpower. It was a smaller, stranger decision. Instead of trying to redesign his entire life at once, he chose one single anchor. The first 15 minutes after he clocked in for his shift, no phone during those 15 minutes. Just him, the quiet booth, and a small notebook where he wrote down one thing he was avoiding and one small step toward it. That was the entire rule, 15 minutes, one notebook. Nothing else changed that first week. He did not touch his diet. He did not set an alarm any earlier. He simply protected those 15 minutes the way he protected the warehouse gate, without negotiation, without exception, without needing to feel like it mattered that night. Within 2 weeks, something shifted that surprised him. The 15 minutes of stillness had started to feel less like a rule and more like a place he wanted to go. He began adding small things around it, a short walk before his shift instead of sitting in the car, water instead of the sugary drink from the vending machine. By the end of 2 months, he had paid off the $420, not through some dramatic income shift, but because the hours he used to spend scrolling had quietly turned into hours he spent doing small side jobs for a neighbor who ran a landscaping business. He also noticed something he had not expected. His daughter had started asking him what he wrote in the notebook, and some mornings before school, she would sit across from him at the counter and write a line or two in a notebook of her own, mimicking a habit she did not fully understand but clearly wanted to belong to. Nothing about Daniel's outcome was extraordinary. He did not become a different person overnight. There was no single morning where everything changed. He simply became a slightly steadier one, week after week, and steadiness held long enough is what people mistake for a miracle from a distance. I am becoming someone who keeps small promises to myself. There is a stillness available to a person at 2 in the morning that is not available at any other hour, a kind of quiet that has nothing to do with the absence of noise and everything to do with the absence of performance. No one is watching a warehouse guard at 2 in the morning. No one applauds him for choosing the notebook over the phone. And that, it turns out, is exactly where real discipline is built. Not in front of an audience, not in a moment of public declaration, but alone, in the hours no one else will ever know about. There is an old idea that the truest test of a person's character is what they choose to do when nothing external is asking anything of them. Not for applause, not for approval, just because it is aligned with who they have quietly decided to become. Most of modern life is arranged around visibility, the streak counted publicly, the progress photo shared, the announcement made to friends before the work has even begun. There is nothing wrong with sharing a journey, but there is a quiet danger in needing an audience for it, because an audience can only witness the parts of you that perform well. It cannot witness the 15 minutes in a parked car before a shift starts, or the decision, made in total privacy, to close the notebook and rest instead of scrolling. When you strip away the audience, the streak counting apps, the announcement to friends and family, what remains is the only version of discipline that actually survives. The private kind, practiced in rooms no one else will ever walk into, sustained by nothing but your own quiet agreement with yourself. An unseen order seems to notice this kind of quiet fidelity even when no person does, and there is a certain peace available only to those who have stopped needing to be seen in order to keep their word to themselves. History offers a striking example of what this kind of discipline looks like under far greater pressure than most of us will ever face. In the early 20th century, a British explorer named Ernest Shackleton led a crew toward Antarctica with the aim of crossing the continent on foot. Their ship became trapped and eventually crushed by pack ice long before they reached land, leaving the entire crew stranded on drifting ice floes with no way to call for help and no guarantee that any rescue would ever come. What followed was not a story of one dramatic act of heroism, but of many months of small, repeated discipline, rationing food precisely, maintaining routines even when despair would have been the easier response, keeping morale steady through nothing more glamorous than consistent structure, shared work, and an insistence on order even in chaos. Meals were served at fixed times. Watches were rotated on schedule. Small rituals of ordinary life were preserved deliberately, not because they were urgent, but because the crew understood, whether they could have named it or not, that structure itself was what would keep despair from becoming permanent. Every member of that crew eventually survived, an outcome that historians still regard as remarkable given the conditions. What made it possible was not a single burst of heroic willpower. It was the accumulation of disciplined, unremarkable choices made day after day in freezing, uncertain conditions by people who had every reason to give up and chose repeatedly not to. There was no single dramatic morning where the ice released its grip and everything resolved at once. There was only month after month of the same small procedures, held to with a consistency that had nothing to do with how anyone felt that particular day. The lesson is rarely the dramatic rescue itself. It is the quiet, procedural discipline that had to exist for months before any rescue was even possible. The same quiet discipline, in far gentler conditions, that separates the 10% who finish a demanding season of change from the 90% who abandon it by the second week. I return to my structure even on the days I do not feel like it. Long before modern language for any of this existed, monks across many different traditions, in mountain monasteries, in desert communities, in quiet temples, understood something that most people attempting a disciplined month completely miss. They did not rely on inspiration to get them out of bed before dawn. They relied on a bell, a schedule, a repeated rhythm that did not ask how they felt that morning. The outer form people usually picture, the shaved head, the plain robe, the silence, was never the actual discipline. It was simply the visible edge of something deeper, a structure so consistent that willpower became almost unnecessary because the pattern itself did the carrying. This is the piece most people chasing a strict month of self-improvement borrow by accident and lose by morning 3. They copy the extreme rules: no phone, no sugar, no sleeping in, without copying the actual mechanism that made those rules survivable. Rhythm, repetition, and a refusal to let a single bad morning become evidence of failure. A monastery does not run on inspiration. It runs on a bell that rings at the same hour regardless of how anyone slept the night before, and over years, that unglamorous repetition accomplishes what raw willpower alone never could. An old teaching, echoed in different words across many traditions, puts it simply: it is not the person who never stumbles who is wise, but the person who rises again without drama each time they do, treating the fall itself as unremarkable, simply the next occasion to begin again. No shame is attached to the stumble. No ceremony is required for the return. There is only the next small, ordinary act of showing up, repeated until it no longer feels like an act at all. I am not the sum of my worst morning. I am the sum of what I do afterward. Around this point, if you have felt, even faintly, that recognition of your own last attempt at change, the list you wrote, the rules you broke by Wednesday, the quiet shame you never spoke aloud, know that there is more waiting below for those who want to build this properly, not as a dramatic declaration, but as a structure that can actually hold. This is why, when people ask how to actually win at a serious period of discipline, the honest answer disappoints almost everyone who wants a dramatic one. You do not win by wanting it more than the 90% who quit. You win by building something small enough to survive your worst days. Choose one anchor, not 12. Choose a time of day, not a mood. Let the first version of your new structure be almost embarrassingly modest. 15 minutes, one habit, one boundary, because a modest structure repeated for 40 days will outperform an ambitious structure abandoned by day 4 every single time. Expect the bad mornings. Do not treat them as proof that you are the kind of person who cannot change. Treat them the way the old teaching suggests, as unremarkable as simply the next occasion to begin again, without ceremony, without self-punishment, without needing to feel anything in particular before you do it. I keep my structure smaller than my ambition, so my ambition has something solid to stand on, the version of you who completes this, who reaches the other side of a genuinely disciplined season and finds themselves calmer, steadier, harder to shake, does not get there by feeling more inspired than everyone who quit. They get there by needing inspiration less and less as the weeks pass, because the structure itself has quietly taken over the work that motivation used to do alone. And for those who want the fuller path laid out, the anchors, the rhythm, the way to rebuild after a missed day without losing the whole attempt, that guidance is there, waiting below, whenever you are ready to go further than tonight. Return, for a moment, to where this began, to the version of you who has started before and quietly stopped before, who knows exactly what day 9 feels like, who has felt that particular shame of restarting in secret. That version of you is not proof of weakness. It is proof that you have been building the wrong kind of discipline, The loud kind, the kind that depends on feeling unstoppable. What you are being offered tonight is smaller and far more durable. Not a dramatic reinvention, but a quiet structure sturdy enough to hold you on the mornings you do not feel like showing up at all. There is no ceremony required to begin this properly. No countdown, no perfect Monday, no need to wait until the conditions feel right, because the conditions will rarely feel right, and the 90% who fail are usually the ones still waiting for a feeling that was never going to arrive on schedule. The 10% who make it through are not braver, and they are not more disciplined by nature. They simply stopped waiting to feel ready and started building something small enough to survive an ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday. 90% of people fail because they built something that only works when they feel strong. You are going to build something that works even when you do not. Choose the small anchor. Protect it without needing a reason. Let the rest of your life rearrange itself slowly around that one steady point, the way it always eventually does, quietly, without applause, the same way it did for a guard in a warehouse booth who never set out to change his life and simply kept one small promise, one ordinary night at a time. You do not need to feel ready. You only need to begin again, quietly, in the next 5 minutes.